All right, we are live. What's up, everyone? We are live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, 2 different Twitter accounts. Thanks everybody for jumping in. Ashur, ready to have a conversation?
Let's do it, King.
I'm looking forward to it. Those that are watching live, we'll see your comments come up, so feel free to comment. Please share this out on socials. I see Carter. I see Sugar Man in the house. I see Ranger in the house. Yeah, so feel free to comment. I'll see them up there. We're not going to put them on screen just for post-production, but I will see them, and we'll try to loose some things into the conversation. We'll start off with just kind of a quick little monologue kickoff that we do each and every episode. This is a daily podcast, so it'll be out tomorrow. Today's episode just went live about an hour ago. And the name of it is Why We All Have to Be Naked in Web3. That's literally the title, and it's talking transparency, which I think might get into a little bit of our conversation today. So yeah, definitely check out today's episode. I had some fun. There's some like innuendos in there that were a heck of a lot of fun. So let's all right, we have that in the Discord. All right, so I'm gonna start the intro, and then we're gonna get going. Let's do it. What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of NFT 365. We, of course, are brought to you and sponsored by the Crypto Business Conference. Crypto Business Conference is for those that are looking to level up on all things Web3, NFTs, Metaverse, happening in October in beautiful San Diego. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the podcast. And as I do each and every episode, but before I get to that part, I love to do a throwback, and I love to pull in NFTs that we're minting. We're doing a podcast every single day for a year, but we're also buying an NFT every single day for a year. And so today is day 272 in a row that we've been buying an NFT. And what's fun is kind of going back into the machine and saying, okay, when do we mint this project, or when do we add this project? But one of the difficulties when I came up with this idea was the parameters that I put around it was the project has to be in the mint phase pre-reveal. So I'm not buying any projects that were out prior to November. And if they minted out and it was an instant reveal and I didn't get on the whitelist or whatever it may be, it can't be part of our collection. And so there's some projects that maybe have launched, let's just say August of last year, that I was unable to get into the project because it was before the November. But what works out nice is when they actually roll out kind of their phase 2 or derivative or their second piece. And so we're definitely giving a shout out to LazyCubs, which is part of the Lazy Lion family. And we actually minted them back on May 18th. So May 18th, it was number 188 in our collection. Wow, it's kind of crazy to think that it was almost 100, a little bit less than 100 days ago that the LazyCubs rolled out. And so that one is in our collection for 188. And not only have I been a fan of the project, but I love I'm a hat guy, and I didn't have a lazy hat in the original Lions, and as much as I mint a lot of projects, I mean every single day for 272 days, my personal bag, I often have to like sell what I mint to go buy the one that looks like me or the one that I like. But I actually minted in my personal bag one of the Lazy Hat Cubs in this project, so it was like a little bit of a fist pump on that side. And, with that being said, we actually have a fun guest for you today. It is actually one of the co-founders of Lazy Lions. Ashur, thanks so much for joining us today. Let people know a little bit about you, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Sure. Thanks, King. I'm excited about this one. Like you mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Lazy Lions. We actually just had our 1-year anniversary, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I know. Wild times, especially like when you look back at like how crazy the space was, and all the events that happened, all the big projects that were around and have come up. But yeah, so we started a year ago. Man, it's been amazing. We made a big bet on community from day one. And that, seemed to be one of the winning bets. And I think one of the key bets as well moving forward. So, that's part of it. Man, I mean, I could talk about what I used to do before Lazy Lions.
I want to get there in a second because, it's funny. I went back and looked, and so I don't think I've actually shared this story exactly on there, but actually, the Lazy Lion mint was the first attempt I made of buying an NFT in the mint phase. And I don't know if anyone out there is listening. I did not know about gas and understand it correctly. And so I put in ETH the exact, and like, here's the part. I added the exact amount of cash into my exchange, moved that into my MetaMask. And I remember that day. And the other part that I just didn't really realize, because I remember Bored Ape Yacht Club, I was in Clubhouse when that happened. I didn't expect it to sell out on the first day. Maybe you didn't either. I remember being like, oh my God, I was that idiot that people were talking about that didn't factor in gas. And so I remember I went into Coinbase and I added more money and it said it had a 24-hour hold. I was like, we're good. I'll come back in. And I remember it was like that night. I remember I was something on Twitter and so I scrolled and I was like, does that say Lazy Lions sold out? And that to me is just kind of wild thinking back there. I even went and saw a tweet that said like lesson learned, just got taught the importance of gas in NFTs. So it's, congrats on the 1 year. We haven't had anybody actually we had one of the co-founders from the Cats project. Why? I can't remember what the name of the project now was.
Got a Cats.
Yeah. And so we had them on the podcast early on, but a year anniversary. But before we get into Lazy Lions in that world, take me back. Let's say 13 months ago. What was Ashur, and where did like the origin of Lazy Lions come from? Give us a little bit of that.
Yeah. Okay. So like 13 months ago, I probably started a bit earlier than that. Hey, so man, I think this really goes back to when I was 12. I think that's a more relevant part of the story, right?
I like that way back. I mean, you're young, but I mean, you're not that young. So that is definitely the way back. I like it.
Yeah, man, that way back. And like, I don't know if people think like I'm like a trust fund baby or something weird like that. I don't know. I've seen some like comments like, my parents are immigrants. Like we grew up in Southwest Sydney, lovely place. Public housing, welfare. We didn't have much, but like amazing childhood. I played a lot of video games. Me and my co-founder is actually my cousin, 9. We played a ton of RuneScape. I don't know if you remember that game.
I do remember that game. Yep.
Yeah. And man, I got really into like computing. Like that was just one of those things growing up where I was like, this is pretty cool. So I taught myself how to program back then. Just messed around with the game. That's what got me really excited. But we also used to sell digital assets back then, though obviously centralized, right? Because the game owns all the assets. So I think we grew up with that idea that, and we would buy them as well. But we always grew up with the idea that people value digital assets. It doesn't matter that it's not physical, you can't touch it. Like that's not important. What's important is, how it makes people feel, right? Like the value that people get, which is
what were some of those digital assets that you were selling? Give us a couple examples.
I'm talking about like in-game items.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like in-game items. Yeah. So, fast forward, I moved into like account management, worked for an American company, computing company. Great. Loved it there, did really well. Really, hit my stride and found my passion there. We traveled a lot as well, which was really cool. Met a lot of people. But I've always had that, just wanting to do my own thing. And like, I've tried, like myself and 9 over the years, we've learned a lot. And then we found out about NFTs. Like we weren't, at least myself, I wasn't super big into crypto. It's not, I obviously saw all the waves and stuff in 2017 and everything happened there. But I think the financial side never really got to me. That's not something that, ever really appealed to me that much. But when we found out about NFTs, which was early 21, it clicked straight away. Like for myself, I saw the link between gaming and NFTs almost instantly. And, we saw how small the market was. And I was like to 9, I'm like, this is going to be the next big wave. And like, I have no doubt. So, I was just like, dude, do you want to just spend all that time on this? And he's like, yeah, bug it, let's do it. So, we just dove in all of our spare time anyways. We just threw into NFTs, researching it, learning about it. Obviously being a big gamer, my mind went straight away to let's help gamers create NFTs. Right. First logical step. So we approached a ton of gamers and like no one replied. Like no one cared at all. They're like, okay, cool. So they're not big believers in it. And that's when I first realized I'm like, maybe gaming has a fair way to go. So that didn't work. And, that was around the time that Bored Apes, CryptoPunks was, really booming. And we were like, that's really cool. Right. And what hit me, it wasn't too much I guess like the cultural movement and, like the flex so much, even though I think those things are obviously important. what really got to me was, how you could build a community, right? And you could like co-build a brand together. I'm like, okay, like this is pretty interesting. So, taking everything that we learned and just messing around with blockchain tech and all that kind of stuff, we just, went around with the Lions, found some artists who have done an amazing job. There's a couple artists that have worked on the project over time. They've done great, picking it up.
How did you come up with that lion idea? The first, like, what was the lion, like the origin of the lion originally?
Yeah, good question. So, like for us, it was always going to be lions, right? Okay. I mean, first off, like, who doesn't want to be a lion?
Yeah, king of the jungle. I mean, I can see that. That makes sense.
And it's just a big cultural thing for us. My background's Assyrian, and it's a really important part of our like heritage. They're shown a lot, so something we always grew up with, and I've just always identified, I guess, as a lion. And going online and realized a lot of other people too. So.
Yeah, it was funny. I remember like seeing the first like kind of promos for Lazy Lions, and I was like, it's genius. Like, from the monkey to the lion, like those two just seem very like, even with people that weren't in this space and you had to like restart it, like those just seem like identifiable, characters. I also love like, it wasn't about the flex for you, although it's lions and we're all kings and queens, right? Like, so it's funny how that kind of plays into the conversation. With the artist, Nine being your cousin, you guys had already done some business and things together. Did you feel like a pressure to put it out at a certain amount of time? Like, what was the lead up, like the last like couple of weeks? Were you ready? Were you promoting it? I don't remember. I mean, last summer feels like 20 years in this space, but talk to us a little bit about like what were some of those decisions of those last minutes before you launched, a year ago?
Yeah, I think, definitely you would even say the past year, there's been obviously a lot of pressure, but that's fine. Like, I think we're like, okay with that. It sort of comes with it, right? Anything that you do important is going to have some kind of pressure on it. So I think we just embrace it. That's fine. It definitely was, it was very hectic, especially during that launch period. Sleep, we ended up just forgetting about how that felt that whole time. But looking back at it, it was a really fun time as well. This whole year has been like, it's been an amazing time. When I see the response from the community, just jumping on Twitter or Discord, like even now, I still just sort of have to pinch myself a little bit and go like, this is pretty wild. Like we've got something pretty special. And I had that, I remember very clearly in those first, few days thinking there was something interesting happening in the Discord. People were really bonding in like a really genuine way. And this was during pre-launch, obviously, and from then we knew that we really had something special. So
I'm curious. Okay, so for those that are listening too, like last summer was such. I've made I make the joke that a lot of people could sneeze out an NFT project and it would sell out, right? It was a different time and like where things are going. But you were early, right? Like August is. I mean, for those that don't realize, like there's no way I could have done this project that I'm doing now in August, where I'm buying an NFT every single day. I mean, we're doing it across 15 blockchains, so I've minted on a lot of blockchains. But even back then, like there wasn't 4 per day dropping on Ethereum. We didn't have icy tools to go look at. There wasn't, like a lot of times it was, what are the 3 projects this week that were kind of coming up? I believe that was like kind of August and September timeframe. But I also feel like it was very heavy crypto bro money flipping value, right? Like, and I make the argument all the time when people are, give people a hard time that got into Bored Apes early. Like, must be nice that you minted that early on. I always caveat and say, who would have held it all of that time? Like for me, in the first 45 days, I would have seen that value. I would have been like, this monkey picture that I paid $400 for, I'm selling that in a heartbeat. Because in the times, like, I mean, who would have thought you were getting, a 15x return in that kind of environment, and you couldn't even have predicted things that would have gone where they've gone. I'm curious, like as you think about those early days when you guys launched, like you can kind of share, because like roadmaps really weren't that trendy back then, right? That wasn't really as much a thing. The word utility was used, but it was mostly like community and the things we have being planned. What did you guys remember? Did you have a roadmap on launch day? Like, what was those early ones? And I think it adds great context for people to realize how far we've come in certain things.
Yeah, for sure. I think that part that you're referring to is probably a bit earlier than us as well. August was when it started to really pump up again. So like, obviously timing was a bit on our side too, but then again, like when you look back at it, there were hundreds, probably even thousands of projects, coming out that people knew about every single day, right? So yeah, there were definitely a ton of projects at that time. I think a bit earlier it was a bit slower, and there wasn't as many uses of roadmap. But around the time that we came out, yeah, a lot of people were doing roadmaps. What we didn't see that much was like a big focus on community. I would say it was more on utility, and just like really just building up hype on a specific part of the roadmap. Whereas like our bet coming in was, let's really just focus on engaging the community. So, and when I look back at it, it was really those little things that went a long way. You mentioned the whole everyone being kings and queens, and you'd think it's such a small thing, like, what is it? Just somebody saying, hey king, hey queen, like who cares? It's not, it can't be that big of a deal. But it's one of those things where it just really sets the culture. Like when you come into the Discord, like what you're sort of getting from Lazy Lions, right? And
vernacular like that matters, right? Like, and it, it gives people a sense of feeling. Like I say that, as much as we can, give people a hard time about GM and WAGME and things, there is something about like rallying, with your people, right? And I think and I remember, August, September, the Twitter raids that Lions would do. And I got a message here. Someone's like, Brian, what happened? You added more ETH. Well, typical early, me, the next day a project came out. It was called Blaze Cats. And I went and bought a couple of Blaze Cats, not thinking I just spent the liquidity that was going to go to buying a lion, because, these are earlier days. And then all of a sudden it cleared, and I was like, well, now I don't even have enough ETH to buy it again. Right. It's like the degen world of chasing shiny objects. And you mentioned, community, right? And I'm curious too, like, as founders with, yourself and Nine, what did the team look like early on? And like, as the community started to grow, let's just face it, the demands of managing the Discord and Twitter and social and all of us, including Lions, that kings and queens that are listening, are some of the most impatient human beings on the face of the earth, right? We want everything right away. So what did your team look like kind of like in those early days, and how have you kind of grown that over time?
Yeah, sure. So it was myself, Nine, a couple others. We had Nin, Rizio as well, who helped with the art. He was one of the artists as well. So it was us, pretty tight, but I guess what you would expect from like a founding team. But like you mentioned, as soon as we launched the Discord overnight, there were like thousands of people, some screaming in like a good way. I think most anyways. So soon after that, we brought on a community manager who actually came from the community, Aaron,
Nice.
who's still in the team as well. Has been doing a fantastic job of looking after the community as well. But it's really been a big team effort in terms of like managing the community. I think it needs to be, like we've been like, I don't think there's been a single day where like myself and Nine haven't spoken about like the community and like, had our thoughts on it. I don't think you can ever just leave it alone. Of course, I've tried to, over time, like delegate as much as I can to, everybody in the team has a role to play, right? Otherwise, we're not going to reach success. So doing that, like you mentioned, the community is an interesting thing. I think the greater NFT community as well. I think education.
I mean, the greater NFT community as a whole is very impatient. Me included. Yeah. I'm guilty as that as well. So I'm with you.
It is what it is, right? It comes with it. I think education goes a long way because, if you look back at what people were, really excited about, I would say, and, messaging us and, some really rampant and like adamant on like, for example, like a token. I'll bring that up, right? There was during October, a couple of projects started to do the token. There was a lot of noise, particularly around like CyberKongs, I think, love that project as well. And everyone was like, look at all this money that you can make. And, so understandably, people in our Discord started going, hey, like, let's drop a token. And, we'd obviously done research on this thing beforehand. And, we'd spoken to people who are subject matter experts. Like I said, myself, I wasn't too big on the financial stuff, but obviously like I understand the tech. I've got like an understanding of the economics to a degree. But I spoke to like some people who are really in the space, and they're like, it all comes down to, like who's buying this and why, right? It's like, that's a real big question, like, especially for those who went through the 2017 bust. And it really that question comes down to like, why people buying it? Like, what's the utility, right? I know it's like one of those words that people throw around, but it's like, it really is like, what's the point of this token? And, when we looked at like the macro, it was like, it's a bit too early to release a token with true utility right now. Like, sure, we can release a token and we can, promise, the world and Egypt and, as, some do, but like, we got to be responsible because we actually plan on delivering everything that we do, right? So we can't just go around saying things that we can't actually deliver. So, dealing with that and having to educate, people in the community and be like, hey, like, of course, if we could do that, why wouldn't we do that? It'd be great for us. It'd be great for the community, it'd be great for everyone. But we're a long-term project. I've always seen the value in the long term. Sure, there was a big bull, but I don't think we've even scratched the surface at what some of these NFT brands can really amount to in the long term. So nothing that.
I mean, I will say, I launched an ADHD coin on Rally, the side chain, 18 months ago. And I say this openly. It took me 8 months to figure out how to create utility and in our Discord, you can trade goods and services and with ADHD coin. We have a masterclass where people can pay with fiat or they can actually, use their ADHD coin. And, I bought, a pair of LeBron sneakers that I bought off of someone else sending them ADHD coin. But I mean, it took me 8 months to figure that out. And, that is its own animal. For anyone that hasn't looked at that world, it's another NFT project. And if you're doing it inside of an NFT project, it has a lot of that education, a lot of those variables. There's also a lot of financial risk involved. Like I went with, the side chain that I went with because they're backed by A16Z. They'd already gone through the SEC regulations versus like a mainnet one. But something you mentioned, I think this is such an important thing where founders, there's a balance, right? Where we as owners, we are very impatient, very demanding, but we're also very believing in like the cause, right? That's why we're there being loud. But there's also like this balance of like, how do we push back, but also listen to where the community wants us to go? How have you looked at that? Because I mean, as a founder for a year, and this is from outside, there are waves, right? And there are people that come in that are a whale, they're loud and they're lion pride. And then maybe they're a little butthurt because their one suggestion wasn't taken. They sell their bag and they go somewhere else. And there's like a lot of that is something that I don't think most founders have ever even thought of, like that emotional side, the amount of like education. So talk to me a little bit about that balance that you've had to try to figure out on the needs of the community and the wants versus like, we have to do what's right for that greater whole. How have you guys kind of balance that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, you just review the ideas as they come. Essentially, like we've got an ideas and feedback channel in our Discord. Our team reviews that and then like it's collated. And then, myself and I aren't in the channel. We usually are anyways, like looking at these things, but then it's brought to us like on a regular basis. We do it weekly, check out the ideas, see if it's a new idea, if it has any merit, investigate further. If it doesn't, then, why? And, sometimes as much as we can try and educate. The thing though is, obviously these things take time, and especially during like the bull where like, we were very, sure, like, coin is one thing, but having, like actual human power there and like human resources, that's another thing, right? So, there were probably times where it wasn't super responsive. And, sometimes people take that as, being ignored or whatever, but it just is what it is, right? It's time with the space. I will say overall with ideas, there are some trends that I think are pretty obvious, to those who are in the space, the future of IP and what that means by building a decentralized brand, gaming and NFTs, right? These are two already really big ideas that, we're probably going to start to see really big trends in the near future. But there's going to be a ton of brands who experiment and fail, right? And maybe not fail as a project, but fail in their experiments. And that is okay. We've tried some things,
right?
They haven't worked. Yeah, it's encouraged, right? And it's like, we've tried some things and, they haven't worked. And then we've tried some things and they've worked amazingly, So it's like, it's a balance. I think people have to expect that and be realistic. And I think this market at the moment gives projects and everyone in the community a chance to sort of breathe a bit and go, okay, let's be realistic here. Those who believe in what's happening with Web3 and that it is a big trend, let's be a bit more patient, but of course let's still demand and let's keep experimenting and testing things.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, like on that same thigh, right? Not only, and the IP conversation, it's been a conversation for a while. It just got, thrown into, a bunch of people that are frustrated with the market, and Moonbirds comes out with the CCO decision, and all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And we've talked about it. I did a whole episode. My background is actually in open source software. So I've been speaking in that arena since 2006, 2008. So like I know the pluses and minuses of kind of like that open source play, but we also can look at projects like Moonbirds on the way they communicated, or in some cases, the lack of, a strategic communication or involving community in some of those discussions. How are you looking at that? Because I have to say, like, as someone that holds a project that has lore, it has a very powerful group, seeing someone like Moonbirds take the risk, like, I mean, I tip my hat, we had Kevin Rose on the show on Monday, and I loved hearing his take on, like, he was owning in a sense the fact that they probably communicated it wrong and they probably misgauged how people were going to see. I would argue they just misgauged the education of CC0 more so than anything else. But talk about that from, like, so what are the current status of IP rights for Lions today, and how are you guys thinking about that, like, long term?
Yeah, so they get the IP rights to their line. There's no cap on that. It's an interesting point that you mentioned. It's something that we faced as well in the past. Communication is key. Yep. Education is a really big part of that. And again, these things take time, and I can totally like sympathize, right? Like as a founder, pressure is on, especially on time, yep. And you've got limited resources. You're dealing with partners. You're dealing with day-to-day business stuff, right? Like at the end of the day, there's a company behind this that needs to be managed too. You're dealing with, obviously, there's people in the team, or all these kind of things that comes with it, of course. But I can totally understand why sometimes, like a tweet or a Discord post is sometimes more appealing, and like, yeah, people will understand. And then it's like, whoa, like they did not understand. When that's happened to us in the past, you just got to own it, right? Like, yep. If we make a mistake, like I've got no shame in being like, yeah, like, no, this was a misstep. I never promised anybody that we were going to be perfect, right? Like,
right. I think that's a big piece of it, right? Like just owning the fact that you're not perfect, right? And also community members not expecting perfection, right? Like we have to we come back to reality. Like I always say, like Mother Teresa would not consider herself perfect. So anyone else that's like believing that, someone is perfect. But, like the other part that I think is a tough balance, and I'm curious, like I will say Lions have done a great job early on. And I will give a shout out to Ozark from, early on in the fall, from my point of view. When I was doing a lot of Twitter Spaces and social audio, we connected, and I loved how he was facilitating some things. We can disagree on some other decisions and things that made, but I like always like to give credit where credit's due. And I also think there's a tough balance for founders on internal, external, right? Like how much external communication and conversations you're having, and how much are you in the Discord? And I've said for a long while, as someone, like when I'm in the Discord, I see the two of you there. But there's also from like a public, a lot of the community members have taken it on, right? It can be the derivative, it can be the factions, it can be the different projects that have existed. I'm curious for you, like how have you kind of looked at that? Because I mean, I will say from my personal view, like the last 3 months, massively active on Twitter, kind of like everywhere in the public facing side. But there is kind of like that balance, because like if you're only on public, people are like, why the hell am I holding a lion? Because you're not even going to get me in the Discord, right? And then if you're only in the Discord, people are like, why is my lion price not go up? Because you're not promoting this externally. How have you looked at that? And can you talk a little bit about the complications that sometimes arise? Because although it's great that community members take ownership and have like this, like they bring this to the forefront, sometimes community managers taking ownership and representing the brand can lead to like a misrepresentation in some cases as well. How have you looked at that whole thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's I think there's two parts to that, right? The first part is how do you manage being inside the Discord, Twitter, aka, internal NFT community versus like the greater Web3 community. For us, we have team members dedicated to the Discord. I mentioned Aaron. We've got moderators as well, and we've got, volunteer mods from the community too. We've got the Raw Kings and Queens, which is like an accelerated role, and they share out a lot of content and all that. And, I think the system works pretty well. And so that's pretty good. I spend a lot of time, not necessarily always typing and, chatting, but definitely reading and just like keeping up to date on like what's going on. Nine as well, my co-founder, I know he spends a ton of time in the Discord. I've tried to spend a bit more time on social media, like sharing it out, because like you said, this is important. It's right. Critical that we engage with the greater NFT space, Web3 space. We've got a lot of thoughts, a lot of things that we're working on that I think it's good for us to share that out as well, like things like this as well, right? So This is something that we're looking at doing more so. I think it's very important. The second question of the community members taking on that role of representing the brand, I think that's, it's a really good point. We have seen a lot of cool things just grow organically, right? And like you mentioned, we were one of the first ones as well. So it's almost like pioneering with a couple of the other projects and testing things out. And a couple of the really cool things that have come out is, I think, the community-led spaces. Since the early days, they've been really cool. It's a great way for people to like get engaged and share thoughts in real time. Of course, Discord does that, but I think chatting to people over voice is a different thing. And we've seen things like community trait groups, which I think are very interesting. We're having chats as well, and understanding and seeing what the potential is there. And I think it ties back into the IP rights. Like you mentioned, not everybody's always going to represent it in the best way. Right. And I think we're yet to see how that's going to combine, especially as we start partnering up with, larger companies. We've got, some pretty big partnerships. But I think that's the nature of Web3, right? It's decentralized. Like, people are going to try things. It's not representative of the whole brand. There is always the official Lazy Lions. Of course, people can't use the trademarks and things like that. That's not on, because you don't want to deceive people. I think that's very important. But man, I'm really excited about the future of IP. Really excited. Like, that's a topic that, gets me going a little bit.
So and just for for context, for those that are listening that might not be as familiar with the project itself, right? 100 million USD traded, top 60 project based on all-time volume. I mean, top 60. I mean, that's let's put it where it's at, right? $1 million sent in raw rewards to members of the community. These small brand partnerships, such as Puma, the Sacramento Kings NBA basketball team. We didn't see that done by anybody else early on. Coinbase, some partnerships with Polygon, of course, Unstoppable Domains, another friend of the community, comic books, collectibles, merch. But one of the things that I mean, kudos. I think all of that is really awesome. And the interesting thing is, Drew and I, this podcast was born thanks to NFT NYC, the November one, right? The one last November. And I remember we were going there excited to meet some projects that we loved. And I personally, it was like, we were, loved Crypto Dads, what Crypto Dads represented. We liked the Playboy Rabbitars, and we liked the Lions, right? And so there was kind of like these three groups. What we were kind of surprised were at that NFT NYC, there wasn't as much, there was big blue chip Ape Fest, right? There was that version, Cool Cats had a thing, but then there wasn't as much hey, we're going to wear the brand and merch. And it had to do with the time, right? Because not everyone was doing that. There was also this weird juxtaposition of if you didn't have a CryptoPunk or Bored Ape, there was a weird little bit of a division there. Fast forward to this past NFT NYC, and holy hell, right? It was every party we went to, we were meeting up with groups of people from the Lions. Now, the flip of that, Crypto Dads, another project that has still always been near and dear to my heart. I still own the first one that I minted. That still wasn't the case with Crypto Dads at that event. And to me, that was a little bit of oh man, I really had hoped, they had got that same momentum at the IRL event. I'm curious, as you look back, can you think of some of the things because you mentioned IP, right? IP is about ownership and being able to take it and do something with. But that also can sometimes segment a community, because all of a sudden people take their lion, make their own derivative NFT project, and now they only care about their derivative project, and they're not really as invested into the lion group. How do you kind of look at that and even moving forward? Because I think there's a lot of projects that are making some critical mistakes on dividing and conquering too much and putting too much on the IRL event. Because in context, you guys floor was 2 ETH plus when that event was going on in November. So just to qualify for everyone that's listening, even though I didn't see a bunch of lions running around and it wasn't as apparent, the project was, pumping, and it was probably as strong as it had ever been. And fast forward into this event, and the fact that it had a different vibe, yet still kind of energy there. I'm just curious how you look at that kind of transformation within the community.
Yeah, you mentioned the Crypto Dads as well. Cool project. There's been a ton of really, really cool projects, and I think just with most things in life, especially in the startup world, right? There are going to be some that really hit off, and then slow down, and then maybe have a resurgence as well. No one knows. And kudos to all the founders who are still putting in the the hard yards and in the communities as well. And there are going to have some that have different trajectories, and some that just never take off as well. Just the nature of the space, and it is what it is. There were a ton of really big projects when we launched as well. And, some of them, aren't here no more, but there are, a ton of new projects who came out of nowhere who were really big and doing some really cool things as well. So I don't think necessarily longevity is, I still think it's a bit early. Like, don't get me wrong, it's been a year now, which feels like 50 years for people in the NFT space. And we're proud of the fact that it's been very consistent for Lazy Lions. And, we know there's a future in it. But yeah, it sort of just is what it is.
And that consistency is rare, right? Like, I think that's just the level set with everyone, right? And I'm not kissing your ass by saying that. I'm just saying, like, when you look at a lot of projects, right, there have not only been, shifts. And I'm curious too, like, one of the things, like, you could mention like the celebrities and big names that are in the project, right? From Des Bryant to the Josh Hart to, big names from Chuck Liddell. And, I will also say, I know for our listeners, it's Lions are one of the project that, I can probably get 50 messages from DMs that the first project they bought was a Lazy Lion because of the podcast, which the funny part about that is they were buying it. I didn't own one at the time. Right. So like, I was a fan and believed in what was being built in the fall of last year, but was currently not an owner, but they saw that as like, and I would say that one of the things that I loved, that, especially feeling it from the outside, was there were a lot of people that brought in their network. Right. It was a lot of word of mouth. Like, hey, like so like I would be like, oh, you're in Lions? They're like, yeah. And so are these 10 people that I brought in. I'm curious, like, how did you have, like, were there any lessons that we could teach other projects on kind of growing a community of not the same individuals, but like-minded individuals? Because I think that's probably, in my opinion, the reason that sustainability has really been your guys' kind of magic weapon.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are a couple parts to that, right? Because, community members come and go. So it's about how do you keep that culture in line? And, I go back to it. I think, there are some of those key things. Everybody treats each other with respect. We've got those community values that are out there and published. We've got them as stickers in the Discord as well. So, of course, we've got team members dedicated to this as well, and moderators and things like that who, that I think goes a long way too. And, I think you can even see it in our roadmap. For example, like when we look back at it, you mentioned $1 million USD in rewards given out. And, even though when you divvy that up amongst the community members who are eligible, because it's a rewards program, it's obviously it's not, millions to each individual, but it goes a long way in showing that, the community really is key to this. And that's why there is this rewards program, right? And it ties into the whole ethos and our values and everything that we're sharing. It's not just all talk. We're actually like backing it up too. So, key things like that, involving the community and decisions along the way, had a ton of spaces. I think these are all little things that play up in a bigger picture of, making sure that culture is intact. And, which was really the cool part of our focus for the first, for this first stage. I'd even say the first year, just, community engaging, community building. Let's get that base there first. Then we got a couple exciting stages next, one being the IP stage as well. Gaming is there too. That's something that I don't think anybody in the space has really tapped into, but yeah, I think that's going to be really exciting.
I love that. A couple other things, and I'll tell you, Lions coming in strong. A lot of people in the chat, the live chat that are watching, that are talking about like, hey, I was in August. I was there the first week. I was there. And like, to me, like I've always said, like, I think we even have to find better ways to reward those that like are original minters, or those that originally were in the project and have held that, for such a long time. Like, there's not enough projects that have really been like, wow, those are like legit ride or die, right? Because this market has been even as good as it was, right? For those that think like the bear market is where like a projects can also like, lose steam or divide. Let's also face it, the bull run, when it's taken off and all of a sudden there's money available for you to, sell out of a project, it tests your love of that project, right? Because you're like, wait a second, I bought in for $500. I can sell it right now for 11 grand. That's legit like money. And so, like that is also one of those things. I have two questions that I kind of wanted to pull in here. One of them is around kind of rolling out like the phase 2 project. So you guys rolled out the Cubs. We mentioned Cubs where we minted it on the 18th of May. I think that was the day that I think it was first like a public mint. And for projects rolling, it's definitely the trendy thing to do. Kudos to you guys not doing it like in November, because the pressure was there. I remember the pressure being like, when is our mutants? When are we going to get something to drink? And because like everyone, forgets that like Bored Ape also took, 8 months to launch their ape coin. Yet any project that launched last fall, 1 month after you launched, they wanted your coin, right? Like it was like, wait a second, if Yuga's taken that long, like let's give some bandwidth. But we've also seen, and I've said this since day one. This is like something I've been preaching since 2014. The hardest thing to do is scale trust and community, right? Scale it and think about it from a Facebook group to an online forum. Like we've all been a part of like really great ones. And all of a sudden they get bigger and they get bigger and you lose touch. And all of a sudden you're like, well, it used to be good because like, everyone knew everyone's name or like that kind of feeling. I was excited about the Cubs, coming out, but I would also just like, if we reverse engineer back over the last year and all of these projects, that expansion creates like an interesting thing because there are people that have wanted to be in the Lions for many months, but the barrier to entry was too high from a financial piece, but yet they were able to come in and mint at a lower entry. There's also the flip side of it. If people are like, wait a second, like I don't want people in here. I'm the person that's been in the Lions since day one. Like, don't come in and let these people in. How did you guys approach that? And like, what are some of the lessons? Because I'm really scared for a lot of future projects that like their only main utility is their second and third and fourth drops. And I don't think they're weighing in all of the things that, founders have to weigh in.
It's a good point, right? And we've seen a lot of projects do that and then, lose a lot of steam as well. I think Cubs for us, that was released during a bear market, right? And the original collection, I think, sold out in just under 5 hours. And then Bungalows was 15 minutes. And then, Cubs, even in a bear market, was over a weekend, which shows the demand. Like Lazy, you mentioned it yourself, like with the trading volume and everything like that. I think those are good metrics to gauge the demand that the brand has had, which is great. Like extremely humble and like grateful as well for all that. But you're right. Like I think it is something that people have to look at the numbers and go like, is this the right move for the brand right now? It's definitely harder in these times as well. And it's like, what's the purpose too? Growing the community, I think, is very important. You want to make sure that you get more of the right people in. So, I see that a bit differently. I don't think it's a bad thing to have more community members. Sure, there might be some people, especially with the flex, but it is what it is, right? Like that's the, there might be some projects out there like, like CryptoPunks or something. I mean, Yuga owns them now, but,
right.
Where it's just 10,000 and there's no need to, they're not going to expand, yada, yada, even though Meebits, so it's probably not the best example, but just one of those things. I think you have to align yourself with the project.
So if you look back, because I mean, I remember, I believe it was October, November, the pressure was there for launching, some subsection, right? Mm-hmm. And I will personally say I was the one advocating for the Queen's side of the house of a female version of the PFP, not only girl dad, but there were some people I was welcoming in, and I really wanted them to get into Lazy Lions, but just from the art side of it feeling more masculine than they, and we can look at that as like all projects, right? And anyone that knows, I've talked about CryptoPunks, right? Like CryptoPunks didn't allow the female traits to have a hoodie or a smile. Most people don't know that, right? And there was only 25% of the collection were female of CryptoPunks versus 75 were male. And so like a lot of this is like change trends. But if you look back at like and it's not like regrets, but like how do you look at like that progress of like dropping like maybe the Cubs or maybe it was like a female PFP version of it? Like were there certain things that are like, man, if we would have done that last month, it would have been interesting. Like is there anything like that you can think back over the last year that like were things that you're like, okay, we could have, but we're moving forward?
I mean, I think there's been some times where it's been like that. We're like, hey, maybe if this had launched at this moment and had done this, but hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah.
It is what it is. We're pioneering in a new space. I think overall, like if you look at the numbers and like where the community's at and this general sentiment, I think we've probably done more right things than wrong. And
for sure,
there's so yeah, definitely. But moving forward, I think you mentioned Cubs and Lionesses and all these things. The way I see IP and why it gets me really excited is because I don't think we've seen it exploited just yet in the space. But
I agree.
Completely we're having conversations. Yeah, like other people are having conversations as well. Like this is a big topic for founders and projects. And you almost have to think about like if you think about like Spider-Man or Superman or Batman, right? Like I'm a big Batman fan.
Yeah.
Joker. Like I could describe any of these characters, 1 or 2 sentences, name a couple traits, and you'd be able to go straight away like, that's Batman, that's Superman. And they almost like pass the test of time. And there's so many different interpretations of these characters, right? You see them all over media. movies, short films, animations, comics, whatever it is, toys. And like the possibilities are really endless. And what's cool about where we're at right now is, in the previous world, that was done obviously centralized. It was really controlled, right? But now we're in a space where almost like what happened to, like TV broadcasting with YouTube, where it almost like democratized, decentralized it. And at the beginning, everyone was like, ugh, like who's going to watch other people do, random shit? But it became more and more professional. We're starting to see that stage right now, I think, or we're about to, where we're decentralizing IP ownership, right? And yeah, sure, we're going to see, some stuff which is like homegrown and it is what it is. But over time, especially as incentives are aligned because people have the IP rights, we're going to start to see better and better things. And of course, you've got the main, the company behind it as well. We're working on things, of course. We've got things in the roadmap too. Some things on, some things not, for the future. And so I think that's a really big thing that we're just scratching the surface of right now.
I know for everyone listening and, and the Lions that are listening to this as well, we need more use cases of IP being used, right? Like it can't be just Bored Ape. I know VFriends has done a couple. There's a vitamins out that, is now that one of the, VFriends holders kind of got approved. But like, I mean, that's what we really need that. And like, I mean, that was my argument in the CC0 discussion with Moonbirds. Like, I mean, there was really only 4 people that spoke up that I saw that were moving towards an IP, like actual use case. There was a lot of people that were like, well, that's what I was doing. But like, saying that we're going to use it until we actually start seeing it being like implemented at scale. And I think it's exciting for everything from, logos of brands to physical products to, I mean, you look at Ape In Productions. Like I'm a big Timberland fan. And when Timberland launched Ape In Productions with his Bored Ape as like kind of the face there, I was like, that's genius. It's on the record. It's on the merch side of the house. So for those that are listening, like we need more of those because that also will kind of breed some of the innovation. One other thing I wanted to ask you real quick before I let you go, and I appreciate you jumping on. You were early on. I had reached out and said, hey, I want to get you on the podcast, and we're like, hey, we're gonna make it work. And thankfully, we got to hang out some in New York, and we weren't gonna let you go. I was trying to get the roar sign for those that don't remember. Actually, I'll throw a little video on. We have a little video clip I'll throw right here for those that are watching on the video side. But there's this like awesome event that the team put on there in New York that many of us were at. And I was trying, Carter and I were trying really hard to get, Ashur to give us the sign to take home back to our place. And I love all of those pieces. But the one other question I wanted to ask was, one of the trendy things at the moment is also just the idea of options to burn your NFT or burn to get rewards or burn to get another piece. And then there's also kind of like the staking side of the house. When you look at all of those mechanics, how important is it for you to like look at them from like all sides? Like how are you looking at that? Because I think there is something unique about shrinking the supply in a strategic way, right? Because like even the people that don't want to burn, they're still impacted by those that burn and mostly in a positive way where now the supply is shrunk. How are you looking at that kind of like as possible use cases? Because I think most people are only looking at like more PFPs, more people in our Discord, more things. But I think there's a way to kind of shrink back and also grow at the same time. How are you looking at that as a whole?
Yeah, we're monitoring what people are doing, of course, like with everything else in the space. We've seen a few different implementations of this. I think it always goes back to the question of why. And, how does this fit in with the greater thing? We've got diamond paws, which is, I think, pretty cool. And, it's on brand and things like that, too. It's a bit different. It's not staking necessarily. But, yeah, there's nothing that's really popped up as, being a critical reason as to why. But, again, it's one of those things where people need to experiment, right? And I think there are enough people right now trying it out. So it's one of those things to monitor.
That is the beautiful part, right? I know like Psychedelics Anonymous is doing the trait sharing, right, within their marketplace where you're gonna be able to, list your trait from your from your PFP and sell it or trade it with someone else's one. And I think there's some cool nuances in there, but there is that question of like why and like what percentage of your holders are gonna take into that. The last thing I'll say before we shut this one down for this episode. The partnership thing that is just really undervalued, underlooked at for people, right? There aren't people that have partnered with brands like Puma and the Sacramento Kings. Can you talk a little bit about like like how did that look from like, how does that work for you guys? And like, what was the language? Because like a lot of projects might have the right brand and the right like connection. And if MGM's, I know 2 people that are very high up in MGM resorts. I've pinged them already before on the fact that the Lions are like the biggest no-brainer collab ever. But for the ones that you've been able to collaborate with, what were some of like the ways that you found common ground that they said, okay, hey, we'll come on board with you? Because I think that could really help, our listeners on those that are looking to add partnerships to their NFT project.
Yeah, I think like the proof is in the pudding, right? Like before we even spoke, like the stage was really set. They knew, obviously see the numbers, which is one thing, but the emphasis that we had on community, and that's the big thing for them too. It was really about building community. They're not coming into it like our partners that that we have at the moment. None of them were coming into it as like this is a revenue play for us right now. It might be, in the long term, but right now it isn't, right? And you can see that by their actions as well. Like no one's trying to go and do like cash grabby kind of stuff, at least yet, right? Obviously, but so I think that's really important. And when we get to meet and they know that we're serious about this, obviously there's a team behind it. We're really dedicated to it. It just sort of flows from there. It hasn't really been a struggle for us. And, the conversations that we're still having with them, there's some exciting things. These are big companies, right? Yeah. Things don't happen straight away. I think especially when we're doing that bull, people are like, oh, great. Like, let's go and, take over the world now. It's like, all right, let's take a step back. Anybody who's done, any type of account management, biz dev or sales or anything like that understands like the stakeholders involved, especially in a new area like Web3, right? So, the legal stuff is like the least of it all. So, pretty straightforward for us.
I like that. Yeah, I will say I was hoping for like a Sacramento Kings, collab product line, at the basketball game, right? There could be something really cool there where I could see, that onboarding and I mean, just the education opportunity. Like, let's go educate every person at the Sacramento Kings game on NFTs, like talking about a mass adoption play. For those that are listening that want to learn more about the Lions, they put out a really great Medium article on the first birthday, kind of sharing the journey, some of the things that exist. I'll link that below in the show notes as well. As always, do your own damn research. This isn't not financial advice, but I love making sure kind of leading people down that way. So lastly, send us off with what are some things that you're excited about, maybe things that you're looking forward to as we push forward, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, man. I think really simple for us: community, IP, gaming. We've actually seen an uptrend or an uptick in like market share for us, which is, one of the things that we, sort of gauge and see like how's Lazy Lions doing, which I think makes sense for the space because people are starting to realize, those projects that are just coming out and minting, that's not happening so much, that sort of gold rush era. So people are almost like consolidating to some of the bigger projects, which is great for us because we've got a long-term view. So that's been all good. But yeah, IP, gaming, community, those are the things, and long-term. It's been true since day one, and, it'll continue to be true.
Now, you didn't give us a date on the Lioness or anything, but I'm not going to, force that alpha out of you or go down that way. But, I couldn't do that part on this. But yeah, I appreciate, the candor. For our listeners, right, the beauty of bringing on founders, bringing on people that have been on the journey is, we also have to recognize that not only are we all human, we're all learning this whole thing together, right? There was literally no playbook. There still really isn't a playbook per se, right? There's, we're innovating. I appreciate when I interview founders, there's one thing for a founder to be like, they want to jump on every shiny object. That scares me more so than a project that doesn't want to adapt at all, right? Because if they're, jumping on every shiny object and doing everything that everyone wants, how are you staying to that core mission or that core purpose? And I think a lot of projects that did that over the fall and this early of this year are disappearing right now. Like if we go back and reverse engineer, it's because they spread themselves too thin. They forgot their mission and their values and their core beliefs. And so, Ashur, I give you a lot of credit and kudos on that. Like, I was going to push for the, certain things, and I appreciate hey, we're listening, we're learning, but we also, understand our core beliefs. And I think that's where the community is as strong as the Lions community is as a whole, the Cubs included in that. So for all those that are listening, definitely check out our sponsor as well. We will be in San Diego for the Crypto Business Conference, October 9th to the 11th. I'm excited to be the opening keynote on day number 2. And I believe if you look at some of the promo graphics, it's actually my lion is what is being used as the promo that is out there. It was actually my lion was on New York Times New York billboard as a speaker there at the event, because that's the one I used for NFT NYC. So it's kind of funny how all those synergies. But yeah, definitely check out Crypto Business Conference at socialmediaexaminer.com/NFT365. Of course, that will be down below in the show notes as well. So for Ashur, thanks again for coming on and hanging out with me. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again soon.
Thanks for having me, King.
All right. Cheers, everybody. Make it a great day.